anyone in the audience or watching would like to follow along and see what this document looks like, you can go to that link on this slide. It's epnonprofit.org/economic-impact. We had our first presentation of this study this morning. So this is fresh off the printers. We love good hometown businesses that call them on a Monday morning and say, can you please rush and print this? So thank you to Hobart Office Services. This Estes Valley Nonprofit Industry Economic Impact Study was in partnership between the Estes Nonprofit Network and in part funded by the Work-Based Learning Incentive Program, which is a program of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment that was administered through the Fort Collins Area Chamber of Commerce. So we were actually able to have that cross-geographic reach with them to put on this project. The analysis of this project was done by Lucy Scott, who is an Estes Park Bobcat. She is now in her senior year at CSU in a economics major. She does not know what she wants to do with it yet, but she's very excited to learn what's out there. This is the first of its kind in a geo-targeted study in terms of on a small scale. The Colorado Nonprofit Association, in collaboration with Philanthropy Colorado, had done an economic showcase about what's happening across nonprofits in Colorado, but it really focused on the large, like 5 different regions throughout the state. So we are diving into what's happening in Estes Park. And this study establishes a baseline for understanding the collective impact of our local nonprofit sector. So when we talk about how many nonprofits we have in the Estes Valley, we often hear the number 114, and we do. That number is growing, but as of the last IRS check, we have 114 organizations. Out of those 114, 70 of them are 501c3s that have active programming, are located in and in service to the Estes Valley. So that other 40 plus, those are C4s, C6s, C8s, social clubs, nonprofits that are in Estes but serve outside of the community, and nonprofits that have services in Estes, but they aren't active at this time. So this study is baselined off of 70 organizations. We sent out a survey in the summer of 2024. We had 56 nonprofits self-report. We were able to pull 7 organizations information from 990s, which is our public tax form, and then 7 of them did not self-report, and we couldn't pull their 990 because they filed a postcard, which means they operate at less than 200,000, usually less than 50,000. And the postcard, there's very minimal information on it. So the Estes Valley nonprofit industry is a notable contributor to the region. This is what the CNA based one of their economic studies on, which is the Northeast region. That's 7 counties. And out of this Northeast region, there's 2,600 nonprofits. Estes Valley accounts for 1.6% of the population of this Northeast region, yet we hold 3.8% of the nonprofit jobs. And even more so, we spend 7.2% at our nonprofits. So what that tells me is that our nonprofits are active in turning over their income into services in our community. Nonprofits are not just economic drivers, not just charities, they're economic drivers. Scratch that from the record. This is the big wow moment. We were able to calculate a rough estimation that the Estes Park GDP is $1.1 billion. Our local nonprofits account for 10.3% of that local GDP. That is about $114 million. Visitor spending is the largest account in that at $504 million, resident income $433 million, business income at $241 million, government spending at $88.5, and nonprofits at $114 million. And this is annually. The makeup of our nonprofits are small, which is in line with what is statewide, but we specifically scale towards the smaller end. 82% of our nonprofits have a budget of less than $500,000, whereas about 60% operate at less than $200,000. The median budget for our local nonprofits is $132,000. So they are small, but they are mighty. There is a discrepancy, not a discrepancy, but a gap, I should say, between the $5 million to $15 million, and then there's a big gap, and then it's $45 million. We have one nonprofit there. So I believe it's on page 14 of your report. There's a chart that pulls out the top 1% to help unskew the data of what nonprofits actually look like here in the Estes Valley. One of the questions that we often get is, well, why are we including a nonprofit that is just so far off the charts in terms of income? Because that's going to skew that data, but they still are a nonprofit. It's just like the $500 per year nonprofit that, sells flowers. They are still a nonprofit just as much as this large one. I don't know how to go back, but with that budget breakdown, this also tells us that funding challenges hit small nonprofits the hardest because they often lack reserves or have that large donor base to be able to fall back on. So when I first started, I was looking at our old website at the time and went to our nonprofit list. And when I got to the E's, my eyes started to glaze over because everything is Estes Park, Estes Valley. So, so we really wanted to make a way to shape the nonprofit industry and have sectors within that industry. So we have 6 different sectors that our nonprofits can choose from. You can see that list there. The names that are under each sector, that's just some examples of the nonprofits who identify in each of those. Our nonprofits self-identify, but our largest sector is the community and education sector, and our smallest is health and wellness. And the chart on your left will be able to show you kind of where those fall. The revenue by sector, so nonprofits bring in, and this is hard dollars, $103 million per year to this economy. Youth and families, again, that is the sector where that $45 million nonprofit lives. So that is very big, but they bring in the most at 57.1%. Arts and culture brings in the least at 1.1%. Arts and culture and emergency and human services, I just want to point out, those 2 sectors do not have nonprofits that fall in that 5 million plus category. All of the other sectors do. So with this $103 million of revenue, 31 million of that is generated from outside of the Estes Valley. So that's $31 million that would not come into this community without our nonprofits. Tourism is at 17.3. We know that $504 million from the Visit Estes Park Tourism Intercept Survey from 2022, I believe, stated that visitors spend $504 million in this community. If you take 17.3% to that 504, tourism is contributing 3.4% to local nonprofits. We see that as a growth area. That is a very easy opportunity for us to help grow programming, to help catch more of those dollars, to help offset nonprofit costs. Again, I just spoke about this, but you'll see in our action items at the end, one of our goals is to increase the Giving Guest program, which again is at that intersection of business, philanthropy, and tourism to help access unrestricted dollars for nonprofits. The expenses are at 97.3 million. Again, consider that the youth and family sector that has that large nonprofit in it. But it's about a $5.5 million difference between income in and expenses out. And what that shows me is that our nonprofits are turning their income into services very quickly. Very few are holding money for the rainy day. This percentage, or this difference of 5.5 million is very rare for the statewide. I believe statewide income was about 20% higher than expenses. Okay, this is a slide that gets me most excited. Public investments in our nonprofits are relatively small in terms of the value that they're bringing. So we got this $114 million number, which is the value of goods and services. So this includes the $103 million of hard income, volunteer hours, and in-kind contributions gives us that 114. If our nonprofits were to go away and the town or the government were to take over the services of that nonprofits currently offer, we would need to increase that service cost by at the minimum 35%. So that would cost our taxpayers $131 million annually. These are annual numbers. If it were to go to a for-profit, we would need to increase that number by 50% at the minimum, and that is for a 10% profit margin for that business, to $146 million annually. So our nonprofits are not only a powerhouse of value and that they're doing good in the community, but they are a bargain value. They are saving taxpayers, saving community members money by holding the work that they do. Public investment, the town of Estes Park contributes about 500, so at the time of this was based off the first year of 6E funding, not the housing authority pass through, but the child care funding. So $567,000 annually, about $362,000 between base funding and community initiative funding. And then in the first 6 months of 6E, there was $205,000 dispersed to local nonprofits. That number is obviously growing as we see that change in the from 88 to 12 to 80 to 20. But that's your number right there. In-kind contributions, again, 8.2 million in volunteer contributions. The population of Estes Park on a good day is roughly around 6,000. I think we can all agree to that. We have reported almost 4,000 volunteers, individuals, volunteering in this community. From that, 225,000 hours volunteered. Colorado values a volunteer hour at $36.36 per hour. So that means volunteers have given back $8.2 million to this community. I believe that this number is a very small sample size. We had some nonprofits not answer this question. We had some nonprofits, when they answered it, I was like, well, that's not right. Like, I know for a fact that you give way more than 10 hours a week. So I am, and I don't have the data, so I won't put it on there, but I firmly believe that that number is doubled, if not tripled. And that only includes nonprofits. That doesn't include government agencies who rely on volunteers, like the fire department, the park, the school. 60% of our nonprofits operate without paid staff here in the Estes Valley. So we pay out annually $47.3 million in salaries. That's only for the 40% that operate with paid staff. 636 employees across the industry here, and 76% of those live locally here in Estes. What that tells me is that our nonprofits are invested in this community and their workers are invested in this community.
Cato, sorry to interrupt, but is that number, the salary number, is that just like straight financial compensation, or does it include like benefits, and or is it the full package?
That's the full package.
Okay.
Yes, that's the full benefit package. According to the Housing Authority study that was done, I think last year, about a third of for-profit businesses have employees that are from outside, that have to commute in. So we are at about a quarter, just under a quarter of nonprofit employees are commuting in. The demand is rising for our services, or for nonprofit services. 55% of nonprofits have seen a higher demand within the last year, and 43% struggle to meet that demand. In one of the pages in your booklet, there's actually a breakdown. This was the only question we asked that people could type in their own answer and give like person-to-person feedback. So we aggregated their responses per sector broken down in that report. But across the industry, we're seeing rising costs being an issue, funding competition, workforce shortages, and a lack of tourism-driven funding. But we have the power to make changes. The Estes Nonprofit Network doesn't believe that we do a report, it gets put on the shelf, and then it collects dust and we're done. We are using this report to help us know what our nonprofits need, where they need us to be, and how we can step in to support the entire nonprofit industry. As I mentioned before, one of the first things that we are growing is our Giving Guests program. We have an active partnership right now with Visit Estes Park to help provide marketing support, to create videos about it, to show tourism that you can stay, play, and give while you're here. We're also growing that to not only have businesses, but also lodges that might be willing to add on $1 per night to their stays. So that way people who stay at a lodge, a B&B, whatever, if they have a 5-night stay, they would then donate $5 back based on this optional fee. So we are growing that program as we speak right now. Again, trust-based philanthropy, my outreach director, Karen McPherson, put out an article about 2 years ago called The Nonprofit Overhead Paradox. What this talks about is it's very easy for funders to want to restrict dollars to programs, but overhead is just as important as programs, because without the people, you cannot run the program. So this article really dives deep into what does it mean when you give $1 and restrict it. This goes hand in hand with us advocating for trust-based philanthropy, and we also want to do what we're doing right now. We want to push out this study. I am available to meet with anyone who would like to deep dive into that 24 pages. I have so many spreadsheets. It's a little bit alarming with all of these numbers, but I would also really like to help other small rural communities that rely on their nonprofits replicate this study. So that way they can be just as informed as the public to the value of nonprofits, but that way the nonprofits are informed of how they show up in their communities. They are not just having their hand out saying, can I have some more? They are doing good. They are economic drivers. And without nonprofits, small communities, their cracks would become canyons. The end. Any questions? Mayor Hall?
I was going to ask the other trustees. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
I read your stuff and read through most of it already in the time that you had provided that. And so hearing it a couple times really helps. And
Yeah.
I do understand the power of amplification and education that you're able to bring in a relatively unique way with this organization.
Yeah.
So good stuff.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the good work. Other comments or questions?
Hopefully a quick question. And you mentioned the need to kind of drill down locally beyond just the region so that we could kind of get some specifics, which I totally appreciate. And I think I know some of the answer to this, but could you talk about why the nonprofit network is still so hard to not say EPNRC, but the nonprofit, the network is the organization to do this work, and why you chose now, because it's obviously really relevant with some of the other things you talked about as part of your presentation, but just in particular, like what was the impetus?
Yeah. Really, it was a large push upon my hiring at EPNRC. This was something that I have been passionate about wanting to accomplish since I moved to this community 7 years ago. It is very, very, very rare to have an organization like the Nonprofit Network in a community doing the work that we are doing. 99% of communities do not have an organization like us. So it is very special that we are here. We know that the Estes Valley has one of the highest concentrations per capita of nonprofits throughout the state. And I have always gotten on this soapbox, and if you spend any time with me, you've known that I get on this soapbox, that our nonprofits are not just doing good, they are a part of driving the economy and need to be seen as such. And they are businesses just as much as they are doing good. So to finally be able to have funding to do this project. A question was asked in the session this morning of how much would it cost to do this project from hiring a consultant. When I was reaching out to consultants in Denver just to help build a framework, at the minimum it was $45,000. So we lucked out, I'll tell you that. But to be able to sit in our unique position, know that a lot of communities don't have the ability or the capacity to do this, but we do. And we can test kitchen it, we can make it happen for our community and make Estes Park rise it up to across the state. And with the Colorado Nonprofit Association of, wow, what's happening in Estes up there? Because now the nonprofits are being quantified, not just in service value, but in actual dollars. So that was really the push behind it. And that's one of my passions, is to be able to help other small communities and to hand them over the methods that we used, so that way they can replicate it. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to Lucy Scott. She was pretty key, wasn't she?
Lucy, I'm forever indebted to Lucy. She is wonderful. She will be back up here this summer as well, and would love to learn more about nonprofits and join any boards. And if any town trustees are interested in picking her brain about economy and nonprofits, she now has about 9 months worth of knowledge, of deep diving in. In that, in the report as well, you'll see all of the statistics Lucy used to calculate these numbers. There's a regression chart as well that shows when you give $1 to a nonprofit, that multiplies to $2.75. The biggest investment is actual investment dollars, which is planned giving. It's another soapbox, but I'll save that. So yeah, very much thank you to Lucy.
Yeah, you say multiply, I said amplification is how I think
synonymous.
of it. But thanks much.
Yeah,
very good
absolutely.
information. As always, thanks for all the good work.
Yeah, thank you all.